All right, Dara Macdonald, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here.
All right, you're the director of the Free Speech Union Australia, but I want to start with you. You describe yourself as a free speech enthusiast. What are some of the experiences you've had that have led you to become so passionate about this?
I think it's probably the value that hasn't changed in my life, more so than anything else. So I've had, some vast shifts in my political opinions over the years. I've updated a lot of my worldview, but free speech is something that I have never wavered on. I grew up in sort of hippie northern New South Wales, and probably people know about Nimbin and Byron Bay before they became uber popular. So I grew up in that kind of area. I went to a hippie school, and it was like kind of the area, kind of the left that you associate with these kind of libertine attitudes. So, very passionate about free speech and freedom in general. And so I guess when I moved to university, being kind of this lefty from a hippie area, I realized that the left on campus was not that. And there was a lot of people didn't really appreciate freedom of speech. And it was at the time when maybe your listeners do or don't know about the Andrew Bolt case, where we have a particular law in Australia called Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, which makes it unlawful to offend, insult, and humiliate someone on the basis of race. So if you can think about those words, offending someone, insulting someone, humiliating someone, these are all very low bars. And that's the case was that he had written some pieces basically exposing people that probably didn't necessarily need to rely on affirmative action programs in order to advance their career, but yet because they had a dash of Indigenous some Indigenous heritage, they relied on these affirmative action programs. And I mean, I think the way he framed that was maybe quite offensive to people, but I know I have known that in my life as well, that one of the downsides with a lot of these affirmative action programs that we have, particularly for Indigenous people in Australia, is it is very demotivating. So I had some friends in high school that could have, gone to university on their own merits. They could have tried hard at the HSC and they would have probably done very well for themselves. But because they were Indigenous, they felt like, I don't have to try because the place will be given to me anyway. So why would I stress out and do all these things in order to compete with people when I don't actually have to compete? So, I have seen that in my life as well, that, one of the real downsides to having these affirmative action programs is that people that could have made it are, demotivated, and because they don't have to, compete in the same way as other people do. So anyways, this was the piece that he wrote. People were very offended by it and took him to the Federal Court of Australia under this Section 18C and won, basically. So they won their case and it was considered unlawful racial discrimination to write these pieces. So that was kind of my foot in to the world of free speech as it existed in that time in 2012 when I was studying law, and having a very different idea to what are the sort of the people that were in university at the time, which all thought this was, a great thing that Andrew Bolt was held accountable for the things that he said. But I guess if you're a free speech enthusiast, you see these cases and you think, well, this is a legitimate debate to be had. It may be offensive, it may be the way he framed it maybe is not the best, but we need to have these debates about what the best way to, advance Indigenous people in Australia are, even if it's a little bit, on the nose, and yeah, I guess if you're a free speech enthusiast, you see these cases where free speech is so, take it is limited, and you see how dangerous that is because it prevents having what is, real world important discussions.
I want to just go back to the case. So this guy wrote a piece criticizing affirmative action, and he was taken to court and lost. So what happened to him?
Well, it was the way he went about it, because he called out individual Indigenous artists, particularly, that some of them have actually come back and apologized to him, like Bindi Kaul, who's an artist that took him to court, has now gone back and apologized for taking, going through that action, and has had a real mea culpa moment. But so it was because he called out these individual artists who had relied on the fact that they were Indigenous to get certain benefits in their career, in their artistic career. And his argument was that that was not unnecessary. Why do we have these? Why do we give these people a leg up when, they didn't need a leg up, basically? So they were saying that this was discrimination because the only reason why he was writing this piece is because they have Indigenous ancestry. That's the only reason why they could have applied for these particular programs, is because they had Indigenous ancestry. So because he was calling them out on the basis that they had relied on their Indigenous ancestry in order to get ahead in their particular field, that was, directly calling out particular people and on the basis of their racial characteristics. So that was why it was considered definitely offensive on the basis of their race.
It's so interesting, the word offensive, because I heard someone say this the other day, offense is taken, not given. It's so subjective.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's also a really dangerous thing about the legislation, that it's drafted in these really subjective terms. Even insult and humiliate, whether you choose to be insulted by something or humiliated by something, those are still subjective terms, because we've had these discussions in Australia about taking the word offence out, but still, even if you take the word offence out, there's those other words in there that, are really subjective, really it's not something that it really does have this effect of, as I said, dampening, but it's really a legitimate discussion. And, there has been some follow-up cases. Probably the most famous example is Bill Leak, although it didn't go to court because he died before the complaints could be actualized. But he drew this very famous cartoon in The Australian, which showed, some, in quite harsh terms, some of the social the social problems that are existing in outback Indigenous communities. And he was also was subject to complaints under the Australian Racial Discrimination Act. But they never progressed because he unfortunately passed away in the meantime. But yeah, it was another case where the similar thing was, similar situation where really in Australia we do need to have a discussion about, the Indigenous community, what's the best to do for them, because, there's no secret that there's a lot of disadvantage, and for various reasons in Indigenous communities, particularly in very, remote areas. And there's lots of social ills, we would say, like there's lots of child neglect and so on going on. I have a cousin that's a teacher in probably the most remote Indigenous community in Australia, and she tells me about all the things that go on in these communities, and they're really shocking. It really is something that we need to deal with, but you don't necessarily deal with a problem by, talking about it in cushion terms. Sometimes you need to be really abrasive, So yeah.
It does make me think, though, these freedom of speech laws or whatever we're talking about probably were put in place because there was so much discrimination, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's where they come from, and particularly the Racial Discrimination Act. As I said, it means that it is trying to prevent people from being discriminated against on the basis of their race. But when you have a provision that prevents people speaking, then that goes beyond, saying, no, we don't want to, hire you because you're Indigenous or whatever the case may be. This is actually dealing with things that really are based on on words, like on expression. And that always has the effect of dampening discussions that need to be had.
Are there other cases like today that you see this sort of happening? Like if we expanded this out, I know it's happening with like pronouns and like cancel culture.
Yeah, I think in Australia, traditionally, as these traditional cases show, it has been the Indigenous issues that have been the hot button topics that really create this litigiousness. But we've seen recently, and even the cases that have been brought to our attention, we've only been operating as the Free Speech Union in Australia for a few months now, but the vast majority of cases that have been brought to us around pronouns and gender identity issues, people using the wrong pronoun or not wanting to put pronouns in their bio and these sorts of things. That's really where a lot of the issues in our current, zeitgeist or our current culture seem to be heading at the moment.
Which is just insane, I think.
Yeah.
Not wanting to put your pronouns in your bio. So, but I mean, you hear of cases of like people going to jail, but that none of that's happening like here, right? I mean,
no, we're not at that stage. We're not at that stage yet. Yeah. Fortunately, fingers crossed. And if the Free Speech Union has anything to do about it, there won't be any of those laws. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we backtrack a little bit? And I would like to know, like, how you define freedom of speech. What's your definition?
What's my definition? Well, I have the broadest possible definition that basically everything is free speech unless it's directly inciting violence or has a direct physical manifestation in the world, such as incitement of violence. Or, if you conspire with someone to commit, a crime, that's definitely, a direct manifestation of your speech in the real world. But anything that doesn't have that direct causal relationship between you said, hey, I want you to go kill Bill for me, then that's clearly unlawful speech. But anything that doesn't have that direct causal relationship between words and a crime in the real world, then I'm basically think it falls under the category of things you should be free to say in our society.
So would you say hate speech is free speech?
Yes, I would. And it's also, hate speech is really difficult to define as well. This is a problem with, essentially the Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act is a hate speech law. And you see how subjective it is. One person's hate is another person's, political argument. And it's really hard to maintain. First of all, it's really hard to define, like what exactly is hate speech? Like, it's this amorphous term that can be very easily weaponized against people that you disagree with. It doesn't allow for equal protection of the law because it has this potential to be weaponized. And it also prevents what is like very serious, as I said previously, very serious discussions that need to be had. Sometimes the speech can't be all nice and fluffy and, rainbows and sunshine. And then, if there's a hate speech law, there is always that case that could be based on the fact that it is a very subjective principle and a very amorphous principle that can be used and weaponized against people that you disagree with.
It's interesting as well what you say about incitement of violence, because some people claim, maybe I'll go back to an example of the pronoun thing. If you misgender someone, that is inciting violence. How are we as a society even measuring this?
Well, incitement has, particularly in the US where they have a lot of First Amendment jurisprudence, they have a very clear, jurisprudence around what is considered incitement. And it's basically, if it's exactly that. If I yelled on a podium to a bunch of my followers, I want you to go kill, to make it completely neutral, I want you to go kill all Johns today. And my words, and then there was, some Johns, a conference of Johns next door, for instance. There's a very clear way in which my words can result in actions, and, for instance, there was a lot of discussion around the footage of the Sydney Opera House or, of the protests where they're, purportedly yelling, gas the Jews, even then I would say it's still not incitement because there is no way of carrying it out in that moment. If they were still standing on the steps of a synagogue yelling gas the Jews, that's definitely incitement because, there's Jews right there, and then the followers can actually have the ability to carry out that incitement. But I think anything that doesn't have that time, that ability between the words to manifest into actions, then I would say that's not incitement.
Okay, so these people protesting outside the Opera House saying gas the Jews, you believe should be protected.
Yeah.
Like you don't agree that it's okay to say that, but
I don't agree that it's okay to say it, but I don't think it's incitement. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Wow. Even though Jews are discriminated against and a minority, you don't.
Well, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's good to say it. I'm not defending it. And I think, in that instance, it's my view that, and same with other hate speech, is the best antidote is more speech and actually to have a counter protest in that instance. Like some people have organized, yeah.
Okay. So this leads me to my next question of, you obviously believe that freedom of speech is like paramount to a well-functioning society. Why is that? Like, can you delve into that a bit further for me?
Well, I think, there's the utilitarian argument that we can't discuss anything. We can't have any kind of debate in our society without absolute freedom of speech, really. We can't decide what is true. If there's things that can't be said and can't be discussed, then we have no ability to talk things out. And actually, one of the main reasons I'm pro freedom of speech is because if we don't have this, we don't have the ability to talk. We only have this left to solve our disputes. If we can't debate something, if we can't verbalize our disagreements, then, what else? How else are we going to resolve it other than through, some force or something, So that's one reason why I'm incredibly pro freedom of speech, is that we need to be able to solve our disputes in our society. And if we can't do it with words, you can only imagine what's left, really. So that's one reason. That's the utilitarian argument. We need to be able to discuss things openly, be able to come to some, if we come to some disagreement, we'd need some way of resolving that. If we don't have speech, we have violence, basically. So that's the utilitarian argument. But I also think is also just as a value as well, that if we can't speak, we basically have no freedom of thought either. Like if we we only think things and not say them out loud, then this is not a free society. This is not something that allows people to act on their conscience. If people can't express, no, I'm not willing to go along with that, then you're basically infringing on people's ability to act out their conscience. So there's also that it's incredibly important for just as an individual to be able to speak freely, because that's what enables you to not just be able to think things, but also to express them and draw a line where you think is possible, where you think you want to draw the line in terms of how you behave in a society as well. So, that's not a utilitarian argument. That's just like human flourishing. In order to flourish, you need to be able to express yourself.
Freedom of speech is essentially a liberal value, right? And we live in a liberal Western society. You don't get that in some societies. Like you just can't say whatever you want to say, right?
Yeah. So that's basically my view. Is on one hand, it's useful. Free speech is useful. It helps us in all kinds of ways. It helps us find the truth. It helps us resolve difficulties. It helps us determine good ideas from bad ideas because we can discuss them openly. But on the other hand, it is actually just nice. It is just nice to be able to speak freely, to not have to walk on eggshells, to be able to draw the line where your conscience tells you that you need to draw the line right now. In terms of that aspect as well, it's just, it's really, and also just to have fun, just to joke, just to be able to, not take things so seriously, not to be so literal. If everything is so, if speech is so limited, then you really it really limits your ability to make jokes and to have fun and to just really to be able to live as a fulfilled human being, really. So yeah, those are the two dimensions. On one hand, it's useful, but actually, even if it wasn't useful, it'd still be good.
We talked about the progressive left a little bit before. When did you, because the left is something that sort of moved our rights forward as a society. When did you sort of notice that it started to deteriorate and freedom of speech sort of started to deteriorate in these leftist movements?
As I said, it was pretty much when I went to university that I had the rude awakening, because I grew up in this kind of different kind of left, this old kind of hippie left. So that was really when I had a bit of a rude awakening. The other one was I've had a series of moments where it kind of I had a 180 change in my views. The first one was that Andrew Bolt case, which I talked about. The second one was probably like most people. I saw that interview with Bill Maher and Ben Affleck and Sam Harris, and really that the discussion about Islamic extremism and not being able to have that discussion, that was like very interesting. And something that, I've always been kind of a little bit universalist in my application of liberal views. So for instance, like someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I think was like a complete hero.
Do you mind just describing the Ben Affleck and Bill Maher? I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. For listeners who maybe don't remember it, it was this interview where it was Bill Maher's show. He had a panel of guests. Two of them were Ben Affleck and Sam Harris, and Sam Harris and Ben and Bill Maher were discussing particularly Islamic extremism and terrorist instances that in this kind of this describing what is also in Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz's book of this idea of concentric circles. So you have people that are willing to, carry out violence for their beliefs, but you also have people that are willing to, excuse the people that are, or, support the people that are carrying out violence. And then you have the people that might not condone the violence, but agree with, a totalitarian approach to really, clamp down these opinions, or clamp down the religious opinions. And then you have this other concentric circle that might not agree with, Islamic fundamentalism by violence or by force in any way, but may have views like, women shouldn't leave the house without a male chaperone or something like this, very outdated views. So he was like carving out these concentric circles of belief in this Islamic community. And Ben Affleck was like, no, you can't say that. It's racist. But what race are we, it's a religion for starters, and it's a religion of of billions of people, right? So it's not exactly a minority. And millions of different types of people from different walks of life, from different, racial backgrounds, and they all have very different belief structures as well. There's different, as everyone knows, there's a lot of infighting within the Islamic community to begin with. So he was carving out this concentric circle idea of the differing views within the Islamic community. And Ben Affleck was basically saying, you can't say that it's racist. You can't talk about Islam because it's racist. And so that was a very eye-opening moment for me of what, in that particular time, what you're not allowed to say in our society. And just, that was just before I left. I lived in Europe for a year and a bit. And when I lived in Europe in the year where the Charlie Hebdo, massacre happened, the Danish shooting. There was the shooting in the free speech event, which I also knew people that were a part of. And then he went and shot up a synagogue as well. There was the Bataclan shooting, the migrant crisis. Every sort of, situation that you can name, I was living in Europe during that time. And that was kind of time where a lot of my my liberal kind of, squishiness just melted away. And I'm like, no, okay, hang on. We need some hard and fast rules here. And one of them, whilst I was always pro freedom of speech, I became, absolutely pro freedom of speech, because a lot of the issues probably, could have found some resolution if it wasn't such a taboo topic to talk about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You definitely made me think again about if we limit speech, like, I can understand the argument from the other side. Like, if we limit speech, it can actually prevent violence, but you don't believe that. You believe that everyone needs to say what they need to say, and you need to debate ideas.
Yeah. I was just reading, just because I knew this was the topic of the book, I just flicked through Nadine Strausen's book, Hate Speech. And one of the quotes she starts off with is, she talks about it's a very tried comparison, but during the Nazi times, so much of the religious community, moral thought leaders backed the Nazis because they were too afraid, because it was basically illegal not to. And only in the society where a lot of people came out against them, despite the penalties that were clearly, put on people that did come out, i.e. Denmark, where it's one of the few places where the Nazis occupied where most of the Jews were not killed. Yeah. So, because they all had this debate, and then there was lots of people that were, shipping people out to neutral territories. Yeah. While that debate was happening. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we move on to the Free Speech Union Australia? Why don't you talk to me a little bit about what that is?
So the Free Speech Union is an organisation that was started by Toby Young in the UK. They do fantastic work. They basically operate as a union. If you get sacked or something happens to you because of something that you've said, also in the public domain, if you post a tweet that gets you, has some ramifications, like sometimes they do in the UK, they have these non-crime hate instances where they knock on your door and say, we are going to give you a mark on your permanent record because you've, used the wrong pronouns or wrote a limerick. And in real case, wrote a limerick, and that was enough to get you a permanent mark on your record for not crime, but still, quasi-crime. So they've been really successful at pushing back against a lot of this. So if they just had a massive case where it was in Lloyd's Bank, a manager spoke out, and he was I think he had dyslexia or something, that he wasn't able to necessarily articulate things in the best way possible, which is another thing which is not really talked about. A few cases that we've had in Australia as well have been people with autism and things that mean that they don't necessarily have the best ability to articulate things, and don't necessarily understand the social coteries, or particularly when it comes to pronoun usage and all this sort of stuff, which has been something that has been thought up about, 10 seconds ago and keep changing. So this is a case where someone had a legitimate impediment to be able to speak in a way that was, keeping with the social coteries of the time, shall we say. And so they had this diversity inclusion trainer come in, and they were talking about how to stop racial hatred in the workplace. And he reasonably raised his hand and said, what if there's two black people, right? And they're talking to each other and they're calling each other. He said the N word. He didn't say N word as in, he said the actual word. And what do I do in that situation when I'm a manager? And this diversity inclusion trainer was like, went mental hearing that word. And decided to not answer his question, but berate him for using that word. And but he didn't answer my question. Like, I just wanted to know what happens when these two people in the workplace use that word. What am I supposed to do? And eventually there was some disciplinary action taken against him. And he said, I don't think that's reasonable. And he got sacked because of this occurrence in this, diversity training. And the Free Speech Union just recently backed him, took it to court. He got, I think, £800,000 payout from Lloyds Bank for this. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing, like if we want to live in a society where people are able to speak freely, there needs to be some penalties for sacking people based on this very innocuous situation. So this is basically what the Free Speech Union does. It acts as, well, basically a union, that if you have some trouble come to you because of something you've said and you're within your rights to say it. So we probably wouldn't, as I said, we're not going to defend anyone that's inciting violence or doing anything completely crazy. But if you're saying something as innocuous as asking a question about what happens if two people of the same race racial epithets to each other, then we will come in and defend you. So that's basically what we do. We try and create a society where people are able to speak freely by defending people's free speech rights, and making sure that there's some pushback against the current idea that you can basically just sack people because of something they said. So another country that have a very good free speech union is your own country, New Zealand. They have an excellent free speech union that go in and defend people. One of my favorite cases that I keep quoting at the moment is one where there was a mortician and she misgendered a cadaver, a dead body that was in the mortuary. And so clearly, seriously, he misgendered a dead body. Clearly looked like a man, in all intents and purposes looked like a man, but apparently before he passed away identified as a female. So she called this clearly male body a he, and got disciplined for that from her boss, saying that it was insensitive. You should use the cadaver's proper pronouns. It's offensive to the family, yada, 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 almost got her sacked. And then the Free Speech Union came in and said, well, basically that this is ridiculous. And as it turned out, the family didn't necessarily accept the pronouns, the new pronouns anyway. So no one was offended. The dead body was obviously not offended. They were dead. And so, yeah, so that was one of my favorite cases at the moment to just show how ridiculous this is. Like, these are not people that, there's always this argument when you're defending free speech and, being anti-cancel culture. It's like, oh, but it's only the J.K. Rowlings of the world and these really powerful people that get affected by cancel culture. No, it's your average mortician in a morgue, not having a glamorous salary or a glamorous job whatsoever, but still she gets her livelihood threatened because she misgenders a cadaver. Like, this is the crazy world we're living in. And this is what the Free Speech Union is there for. So it's for the ordinary person that has their, is threatened by cancel culture or gets their livelihood threatened because of some, slight tripwire that they've tripped and fell over. And we come in and say, what the hell? You can't do that. You can't sack someone for, misgendering a dead body. There is literally no harm to do that.
Yeah, totally agree. So who sparked the idea to start the Freedom of Speech Union in Australia?
So I contacted Toby Young maybe 2 years ago, I think about 2021. And then I got very busy, as you do, and I didn't want to do it by myself. But then eventually Ruben, who's the other director, separately approached him. There were some other people. So everyone kind of got on board. And now there's a group of people to really get it up and running. So that was the main thing, is that it was not just me, it was a bunch of people, particularly Ruben, who's the other, main director. And we all, brought it into existence, shall we say, that it became a sort of a team effort.
And when did you guys launch?
Our official website launch was October last year, but we did a launch dinner on the 27th of November last year. So that's been the official launch party. And now we're, still definitely in setup phase. We're not as powerful as, New Zealand or UK at the moment, because we're just starting. We're just getting everything together. But the goal is to get to that point where we are a force to be reckoned with.
How does it work? So say like if someone says something at work and somebody finds it offensive and they try to get them fired, can this person come to the Free Speech Union? Like how does that process work?
Well, we are a membership organisation, so the first thing you should do is go to freespeechyunion.au and join as a member. We have various membership categories depending on, what you want from us. There are limited circumstances where we might defend you because of you have a particular public interest case, but for the most part, we are a union. You got to sign up, and we will defend our members basically. So basically, yeah, if you're a member, you can write to us. We have a particular email inbox for casework. So much like every other union, if you have a problem, write to us. Someone will respond to it, and we can go, see what you need from us in terms of help. That's basically how it works. If you have a problem and you're not a member, then you can also write to us in the general website contact form. And if your case is something that we might want to jump on just because it's so, it has such, public interest ramifications, we might take it on anyway. But yeah, just generally speaking, yeah, that would be the exception rather than the rule. Yeah, definitely it's more of a case of that we really want to make sure that our members are supported, because we operate like any other union,
Final question. Yeah. What do you hope the Free Speech Union becomes this year or in future? I
guess, we want to do basically what the UK and the New Zealand Free Speech Union. The first part of that is to defend free speech rights for our members. So to really become it's a solidarity movement, really, for kind of proper lefty stuff. Like we want to be cohesive, where we really support each other. Also, the members can have the ability to support each other. So if they do come into hot water, you're not dealing with this on your own. We want to be able to, I'm trying to put together some, some drinks in Sydney and so on, so that people can come together, meet each other, form actual bonds with each other, so that if something happens, that you're not sitting there by yourself, weathering the Twitter storm. You have a bunch of people around you, not just the Free Speech Union that can help you in, formal ways, but also like friends that can come to your aid. So that's one aspect, is we really want to defend free speech rights for our members in particular. And then the other side of that is really advocacy work around making sure that there's no more laws that are passed that are, deleterious to free speech, and the laws that we're trying to work to get rid of some of the laws on the books that are.
And community. I love what you say about community. That's really cool. Where can I direct my audience to? Free Speech Union. So freespeechyunion.au. Please go sign up. Different membership levels. Go with what works for you. The more people that join up, in Australia, we've gone with a model of being extremely membership based. So most other organizations, they have a bunch of donors and stuff that come in, but we've just taken the view in Australia that we really want to be a proper union, in the sense that we're really based on our members, and we would love lots of people to give that small amount of membership money, because that makes us really resilient. There's no big donor that can pull out or get offended or anything like this. We have a bunch of people that, we love,
donations are great too. So if you want to give us a donation, we're happy for that. But we really want to build this really resilient, cohesive, membership basis that is really good at weathering, all kinds of storms, because, 1,000 people is better than one, really. And that's how we really want to do it in Australia. So the more people that sign up, the stronger we'll become, and the more we can fight these battles.
All right. Dara Macdonald, thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's great to chat about this.
Good.